First thing you're going to want to do is Google the name change and the county you live in, because each county typically has a step-by-step guide and online forms. I highly recommend you use, I shouldn't say recommend, I think it's best to use official government sites rather than using, say, like Google AI or something like that, because Google AI is pulling information from a bunch of different places, and sometimes it could be pulling information from an incorrect source. So if you're using the exact county website, typically they will have the most updated information in terms of forms and steps like that. If you're not using an official government website, make sure it's a reputable source and that it is the most up-to-date format for everything you need to submit it to the courts. And then the next thing you're going to want to do is gather all your documentation that might be required for your name change. So I'm talking like IDs, passport, birth certificates, things like that. I want to note here that sometimes replacing those documents, like birth certificates, can take a really long time just because of the nature of how the government works. So if you're interested in doing a name change and you know that one of those IDs is either missing or needs to be replaced, you should request that as soon as possible. That way you know you're getting started right away. So next, you're going to want to start filling out your petition. This is, I think, the part where most people get scared. They look at the petition, it looks really official and kind of intimidating, and then they kind of back out. I don't want you to get like intimidated by a form. It's literally just a form that we need to fill out as accurately as possible and just go step by step, line by line. So a petition is just a formal application in writing made to a court. And so each county will have a hyper-specific petition format. So that's why I can't give you like exact steps for the petition, because your county is going to be different than the one next to you, maybe. So it's really hard to tell. But again, if you Google your specific county and name changes, you should be able to find that information readily available online. And if for whatever reason you get stuck, again, you can hit us up. I'll drop my email in the chat at the end. Also, the petition is being submitted to the court, so everything must be correct. So I think it's very important that if you can, have like a second or third person review that information just to make sure everything's spelled correctly, especially things like your new name. You'd hate for a spelling error in the petition to end up you having a name that doesn't actually reflect who you are. And then some people could have slightly more complex cases. And I don't like to use the word complex without kind of giving a little bit of a disclaimer there. It doesn't mean you as a trans person is complex, but more like there are other complex factors in your legal history that might make your case a little bit less straightforward than others. But complex name change cases are not uncommon, and most people are able to complete a complex name change. So we're going to go over some of the ways that a name change could be more complex. And so this is one of those things where if something applies to your situation specifically, write that down as an action item and write down the things I talk about in terms of documentation. If your name change feels maybe not so straightforward and a bit more complex, it might be best to seek legal representation or going through an organization like us. And again, we're not unique, so if you're not in our service areas, there's probably someone doing similar work in your area. Most petitions are going to ask for any aliases or misspellings of your current legal name. You're also going to want to list it out completely. Most of the time, you're going to need to give a reason for your name change. With our program, we stick to pretty basic language of I would like my name to be consistent with my identity and appearance, and that tends to be sufficient enough for the courts. If you have any judgments or liens, so that's any like money owed, judgments that have been filed in the courts, you may have to list those. So if you have any judgments or liens, what you're going to want to do is grab any paperwork you have regarding that and make sure that you provide that with the petition if that's required for your county. Same thing with pending legal proceedings. So any lawsuits, whether you're suing or being sued, again, you're going to want to grab any documentation about the current status of that lawsuit because the courts may require that information as part of your petition. And then also any other part of your criminal history. So say you have any misdemeanors or felonies, you don't have to list violations, convictions only. And then you'll attach a certificate of disposition, is what they call it in New York, but it's just like the documentation saying the current status of the case. And then if you have any pending legal matters that don't have any results yet, there'll often be a separate pending matters paragraph where you'll include that information. And again, grab any documentation you have on that pending matter because it may be required for your county. So if you have ever filed bankruptcy, you're going to want to include your discharge of debt. There's different requirements state by state on who can be the person who represents the child. So you'll definitely want to make sure that if you're representing someone, that you fit those requirements, because again, they're different state by state, county by county. And then some places may require consent from a non-petitioning parent. So you'll also want to look up those rules as well. Again, if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed with a minor name change, again, maybe it might be best for you to look for an organization like ours that might be able to grab you some pro bono representation. Same thing with immigration. We all know this administration has been very difficult with immigration. There's no way around it. So if you're seeking to change your name and you are currently not a legal citizen in the United States, know your current status. If you are seeking asylum based on your transgender status, sometimes a name change can be helpful in your case to prove who you are. But states have different requirements for different name changes or different people who are not US citizens. So you just want to really assess the current legal situation, your need for documents, and the risks you want to take. And you're definitely going to want to make sure that you're looping in any immigration attorneys that you're working with into the name change so they're aware of that, because you don't want to make things more complicated for yourself down the line if, one court process is going through in another name and another is going through in another. So you'll want to loop in any other legal workers who are working on any other immigration cases. So what you're going to want to do is, I told you to Google the county that you're doing your name change in and follow the state's website. So you're going to want to follow their step-by-step guide on how to file, because not every state or county is the same. So now you filed. You've either e-submitted or you've went down to the courts. What does that mean? So depending on where you live, again, these are laws that are constantly changing, you might be required to have a hearing. So what is a hearing? A hearing would be held in a court in front of a judge. And so they're going to review the petition that you submitted. They might ask some simple clarifying questions, things like that. To keep in mind, a hearing will be held in like a public space with other people who have court dates that day. So there will be other people in that setting. So just make sure to prep yourself for that. Best practices is always, dress to impress. You are in a courthouse. Make sure you show up on time to make it through any security, things like that. But again, not all states require hearings. So make sure that you are aware of what you have to do in terms of next steps once you file, because some courts might not update you when the name change is completed. You might have to reach out to them directly to find out if the name change was granted or if there was additional information needed. And so now we're just going to go over some examples of our service areas and sort of low, medium, high lift, so y'all can kind of put into context some of the things that we've just talked about in terms of possible requirements. So we consider New York City a low lift because of the Gender Recognition Act. Shout out to Charlie Arrowwood and everyone else who worked on the Gender Recognition Act, which made name changes a whole lot more simple in New York City. So we consider that a low lift. We consider Atlanta a medium lift, and then Philadelphia is our heavy lift. Why do we consider New York City lift? Things like no residency requirements. You do have to provide proof of address, but no residency requirements. They got rid of publication. Most people are able to do a name change without a hearing. The processing time has cut down significantly. It used to be several months. Now it can just be several weeks. So there's lots of ways that it's just been improved and made a lot more user-friendly. There's definitely other ways to improve, but it's definitely one of our easier places. It's also one of our cheaper service areas, with the filing fee only being $65 and also there being a fee waiver for that. So that's why New York City is considered a low lift for us. Of our service areas, Atlanta is a medium lift just because it's a little bit harder to waive publication. We have not seen a great deal of success with waiving publication in Atlanta, but we have a little bit more success with like leniency with like criminal charges and things like that. We do still have some hearings that we see. So that's why Atlanta is a little bit more of a heavy lift. And then we consider the Philadelphia to be the heaviest lift because a bunch of things. You have to do the fingerprinting. You There's a publication requirement. Again, you can possibly have that publication requirement waived. The filing fees are very expensive in Philly, so it's $333.23. Again, we can have filing fees waived for that, but it's still a pretty large barrier. And have been hearings as well. So lots of different complicating factors in Philly. Also things like a felony name change ban. So like some states, if you have felony convictions, there may be additional time after you've completed your sentence that you are unable to change your name. Sometimes it can be up to 10 years. So Pennsylvania has that law. So our organization is actively working to try and get rid of those laws because it seems additionally punitive for trans people. But those are things you might want to look into as well. So that's the name change process. Really try not to get overwhelmed. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go through the petition. You're going to want to make sure that you list anything that is relevant to you specifically in your legal situation. Have someone double check your work, and then you're going to want to file your petition in the exact steps that the courts require. And then just make sure to follow up with any next steps that the courts require. If they have a hearing, if they require additional information, or if you just have to follow up with them once the name change is granted to get your documentation. Again, don't let a new process intimidate you. There's places like us where, again, we're not unique. There are tons of organizations like us. Hit us up if you're confused, even if you're not even in our service areas. Like I said, we have a lot of self-help resources. We have a lot of documentation that might be useful to you that we could just forward on. Just know that typically after these webinars, Tina and I get pretty slammed and we're a small team. So it might take us a little bit of time to get back to you, but we do respond to everyone who hits up our email.